For being here and braving the weather. Today is Thursday, February the 3rd. We have a Finance Committee meeting starting at 4:30, which is about 2 or 3 minutes late. I apologize. We only have one agenda item, so this will be pretty short, and then we will get into the regular board meeting. Agenda item number 1, discussion, possible action, presentation of the financial and single audit report for the Bossier Parish School Board and the AUP report for the Bossier Educational Excellence Fund, presented by Allen Green and Williamson LLP. Ms. Bamberg, or yes, there you are. No, I didn't see you sitting there.
That's fine, that's fine. My name is Cindy Thomason, and like I said, I'm a principal with Allen Green and Williamson. And it was my honor to be over in charge of the Bossier Parish School Board. And of course, you know, the purpose of an audit is to give our opinion on the financial statements and also on the compliance requirements that are required. An audit actually consists of two parts. One is what we call a financial audit, and the other is a compliance audit. And a compliance audit is dealing with certain compliance regulations according to the governmental auditing standards, or some people call that like a yellow book, and the other is your single audit. And because the school board receives over $750,000 in federal revenue, you're required to have a single audit each year. And so we'll start with part 1 would be the financial audit, and it starts with this, and this is your financial statements for the fiscal year ending 2021. And there's several sections within this report. The first one is what we call your introductory section, and that's completed by your CFO and the accounting department, and it has a lot of useful information like demographics and stuff that go along with Bossier Parish School Board, and I recommend that you read that. And then the other section is the financial section, and it begins with what we call a MD&A, or Management Discussion and Analysis. And that is also completed, and it gives a lot of information, and what it does is it kind of like compares last year's financial statements to this year and kind of explains the big changes that occur. And then your actual financial statements begin on page 47. But I recommend that you read that MD&A because it does give a lot of useful information. And one of the things it does do is do a comparison. It has two or three tables in there that compares last year to this year and shows the significant changes. A governmental entity actually prepares 2 sets of financials. One we call the governmental activities section, and that's prepared more like a business would do. It includes all your liabilities and all of your assets on it. And it's called the economic method of preparing those financials. And then on page 47, you can see that at the end of the fiscal year 2020, you actually had a deficit net position of $557 million. But don't be dismayed by that, because one of the things that the governmental auditing standards requires you is to put what we call your OPEB liability and your net pension liability. And for the current year, if at the end of the year you had $1.2 million, that alone was, $1.2 billion that is related to that's your liability for providing those other post-employment benefits, whether it be the pension plan or your OPEB, which is your providing health care to your employees after retirement. The actual net position decreased $104 million last year, and the most of that difference is because of one of the things that an actuary uses to evaluate those liabilities, what you call your discount rate. And a lot of that is based on the bond rate. And of course, we know that bond rates have decreased, and as that decreases, the liabilities go up. And that basically it means you're not going to earn anything on your investments, or that investments is going to decline. Big key financial statement items would be your capital assets. And at the end of the year, you had $277 million in assets that can be used by the school board to provide educations to your students. And of course, the other second largest one is, of course, your long-term liabilities. And on page 75, it gives the details of what makes up your capital assets and the changes in that. Like I said, at the end of the year, you had $277 million. 19 million of that, well, 10 million of that is land, and the other one is your ongoing construction projects of 9 million. And then, of course, you have $258 million that what we call depreciable assets. That's your buildings and your equipment, less what we call accumulated depreciation at the end of the year. And the other note that I think is significant is on page 86. And it's your long-term debt note, and it's the changes in there. And at the end of the fiscal year, the school board had $173 million in outstanding bonds and outstanding premiums of another additional $10 million. And then, of course, at the end of the year, you had 16 million in compensated absences. And that is a liability that's kind of based on if everybody retired at the end of the year, this is what you would have to pay out in benefits when they retire. And then, of course, claims and judgments payable is your workers' comp payable at the end of the year. Any questions? Yes, sir?
Understanding. And we have this conversation every year when we go through this. The deferred or unfunded liability. This is a solvent, well-managed entity or school system. Because of this mandated accounting adjustment, it makes it appear we are anything but solvent. And so would you just make it very clear once again that what's throwing the wrench into this whole system is this long-term deferred item?
Yes, that's what we call your other, well, it's considered post-retirement benefits. Part of that includes is your net pension liabilities, is paying everybody's pension. I kind of disagree with GASB on this. They require that you put this on the books. But as far as the school board's concerned, you met your obligations at the end of the year when you paid all of your required benefit payments. But GASB decided, well, we need to let the readers know that it's not fully funded. So.
But a significant portion, if not all, is attributable to the failure of our legislature to fund these liabilities from many, many years ago. And they have yet to step up and acknowledge their responsibility.
Actually, the Louisiana pension plans have been doing better in recent years. Your net proportion of just the pension liability is $312 million. But the other biggest part, which is nearly $1 billion, is your other post-employment benefits, which is strictly the school board's responsibility and liability. That's it. If everybody retired, this is what they've earned to date to be provided those health care benefits as they retire. because it's recorded as you earn it. It's, both of them are
Factor, assuming everyone were to retire today.
Yes, and the total of those, as I said before, they both total $1.2 million. And if you take those two liabilities out, then you have almost $500 million in a positive net position. If you remove those two items, then you would have, a positive net position.
So much for
And
clarifying.
that's part of the difference in these two financial statements that we're going to do, because next we're going to cover your governmental funds, which they start on page right after the
Thank you, Mr.
section.
Chairman.
And I want to, I don't know if y'all notice all the nice pictures, that Nisha and them provided for the report. And they're contributed, below each little picture is contributed to the artist. But those financial statements begin on page 52. And then what we present is what we call your general fund and your major funds, and everything else is what we consider non-major. And to be classified as a major fund, you have to have 10% of assets, liabilities, or 10% of revenues and expenditures. So for the school board, you have the BEEF, the Bossier Excellence Fund, Title I, the 2012 Bond Construction Fund are your major funds this year. Overall, you had an ending balance of $172 million. That is an increase of $4.3 million over last year. One of the big changes that we have from last year to this year is that we had to implement, the school board implemented GASB 84. And see, previously, their student activity funds is what we considered an agency fund. But with the new definitions that came across in GASB 84, student activity funds are no longer considered an agency fund, but now they're a special revenue fund. So we had to add that as a fund for the school board. And as a result of that, we had to restate our beginning net position by $4.1 million. And that's just the total of the financial statements of all your schools grouped together into one fund this year. Overall, your general fund, it actually had a net change of $9.3 million over last year for an ending fund balance of $56.9 million. Big changes is there, is your sales tax. You had an increase in your sales tax from last year. And then, of course, with the COVID money, help and cover some of those expenses, help with that increase. If you compare your, and then within those fund balances, we have what we call restricted fund balance and unrestricted fund balance. And at the end of the year, the school board had $53.3 million in what we call unrestricted funds. And those are the funds that the school board can use to meet its day-to-day operations. There's no restrictions on it. The other component of ending fund balance is what we call non-spendable. That is like, that's your inventory balances, your prepaid, because it's part of what's in the ending balance of that fund balance, but it's not spendable. You can't use it to meet your day-to-day operations. And the other part is your permanent fund, which is your BEEF. And at the end of the year, you have $58.2 million in non-spendable BEEF resources at the end of the year. Of course, you're not allowed to spend those. Those are coming from casino monies, and all that you can spend from that is your interest that is earned. And at the end, you had an ending balance of $60 million. $1.7 million of that is still to be spent, the interest money that's still to be spent at the end of the year. I'm sorry, I meant to say too that your unrestricted fund balance at the end of the year was 53. That's approximately like 2.8 months' worth of reserves to be able to use to meet your ongoing obligations. And that is basically what the legislative auditor recommends, kind of as a minimum, is 2 months, so you're well into that range. They recommend between 2 and a year's worth of reserves for that purpose, so you've met that requirement of having that, plus you've met your requirement for your minimum fund balance for the general fund and also. And then, of course, your other fund is Title I. And at the end, y'all received $3.8 million in Title I funds. And of course, this is what we call a cost reimbursement fund. So you really get reimbursed for the expenses that you spent for the year. The last major fund is your construction fund. And at the end of the year, you had $26.4 million. Basically, that is unspent bond proceeds. Those are the bond proceeds that you received, but yet you've not spent those on construction projects. And so that whole fund balance is restricted for construction projects. And then the remaining is what we call the aggregate remaining, or your non-governmental agents funds. And at the end of the year, you had $29.5 million. Almost 19 million of that is restricted for debt service. So that's the money part of it's twofold. Part of that is your taxes collected that will be used to pay the bond proceeds, the bond principal and interest as they come due. And the other part, you have a sinking fund for your QSCAB monies for when it gets, when they become due, and that was almost $7.5 million of that is reserved for the QSCAB in a debt service sinking fund. Any questions? And so the last fund that we'll kind of discuss is the internal service fund. And those financial statements begin on page 61. At the end of the year, there was a deficit net position of $1.2 million. Part of that, or mostly that, was because of kind of the timing at the year end where you paid these premiums. And I know that, I believe Nisha said that some of those will be, meet the threshold that you will get reimbursement. Is that for some of that? And it was more like a timing issue than actually a funding issue, because some of them exceeded that claims threshold where the insurance will now, the reinsurance insurance should pay for that. You actually collected $52.8 million in insurance premiums and reinsurance proceeds, and then but you had $60 million in claims. And most of that, I'm sure, has to do with probably the increase in medical costs associated with the COVID-19. I believe that's mostly what was going to, that reinsurance will kick in for when you finally get those final bills. Any questions?
Good.
Well, the second part of our audit is our compliance audit, and it's the single audit book right here. And our opinions on both are listed at the very beginning. And I'm really happy to say that we've had no findings for the governmental auditing standards. The actual results of our audit is on page 13. And then the financial statement audit, we say that the audit report issued was unmodified, which is the best opinion that you could have. It means we didn't have to make any modifications for any exceptions that we found, any material weaknesses, or saying that part of your financial statements were not fairly stated in all material ways. So it's considered unmodified. We had no significant deficiencies that were required to be disclosed by the governmental auditing standards, and we had no instances of noncompliance considered material defined by the noncompliance. That would be like if you didn't comply with state laws or other type of, grants and laws. And then, of course, we had the audit of federal awards, and we say that there was no significant deficiencies there as defined by the uniform guidance. At the end of the, for fiscal year 2021, the school board did receive $31.9 million in federal assistance. Of course, $6 million of that is what you call the education stabilization. And then your other large fund would be your school food service. You received $10 million in the school food services. And I do say that too, I didn't mention it, but I think this is the first year you haven't had to transfer money for the school food service. And the several. Any questions? I know I'm kind of hitting it fast and
You're doing just
hitting the
fine.
highlights.
You're doing just fine.
And then the other part of we do as the auditors for the school board is we do what we call agreed upon procedures. We do two sets. One is for what we call the Bessie schedules. That is included in here. These are a set of procedures that actually is state law. It's in this, the Louisiana state statutes. And these procedures that we did, and of course, we had no exceptions. So that's what the report says. And then they begin on page 20 and 21. And the other agreed upon procedures that we do is for the beef. And it's a set of procedures that are based on state law too. And we do certain procedures to make sure that you've complied with this law and to make sure that you didn't spend any of that permanent fund during the year. Because part of the problem with that is the law is based on a calendar year, whereas your fiscal year is not. And so we have to calculate that interest earned as of December 31st, and after, on January 1st, those interest earned is now spendable. And we had no exceptions with that, those funds. That's in the separate book. Any questions?
Continue? Or is that it for you?
That was all that I had.
Ms. Bamberg, do you have any comments or anything before we entertain a motion to accept the audit findings?
I just wanted to thank my team and the support of the board. This was the second year we didn't have findings, and I'm very thankful and appreciative for all the hard work the team's put in. So it's not a one-man show. It's very much a team effort. So.
You and your entire department, I know it's all hands on deck, especially with everything else going on,
Yes,
to do an audit in the middle of everything. We appreciate the effort there, so.
And not only that, we were so much later because of COVID, finishing up even last year.
Right.
So it was like we were finishing up last year and we just turned around and had to do the next year. So,
Sure.
yes.
Sure.
And with the changeover too, in retirements.
Sure. All right, well, at this time, we'll entertain a motion to accept the audit as presented. So moved. I have a motion by Mr. Bullard. Do I have a second? Second. I have a second by Mr. Bertrand. Committee, please vote. All in favor? Raise your hand. Are you two voting? Are you going to play cards? Motion passes unanimously. And that is the only agenda item. Do I have any questions, comments from the committee? Mr. Bullard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to compliment again Ms. Bamberg and her department. They have had to labor under some real difficult times. the last 8, 10, 12, 14 months. And we've heard nothing but good, positive things from our audit group, and I think it's a testament to Ms. Bamberg and how she set up that department. And I just want to acknowledge her good work.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Bamberg, once again, and that will conclude the Finance Committee meeting. Stay tuned for the regular board meeting in 2 minutes. That's it.